today we're going to be learning about microglia. So microglia comes from the Greek word micros, which is small, and glia comes from the Greek word of glue. So microglia are these small glial cells which are located in the brain, and they aid in homeostasis. In terms of the structures, they have a cell body with a dense nucleus, and then they also have branch-like detectors, and these detectors retract and detract, which is how they communicate with other cells and detect certain pathogens. They also change shape depending on the state of the microglia, and they have the toll-like receptors. And so these receptors receive signals and ligands from other cells, which are how they receive information and then signal the cell body of the microglia. So there are 3 stages of activation. First is the resting stage, then the ramified, and then the amoeboid. So the resting state has a microglia on the left and then the neuron on the right. So this stage is kind of like a healthcare worker because it releases a lot of growth factors and hormones and chemicals to the neuron and then use them through uptake to grow. Then we have the ramified microglia. So there are the PAMPs and the DAMPs. PAMPs are the pathogen-associated molecular patterns, and so these are structures that are not necessarily found within the host organism. Then the DAMPs are endogenous damage-associated molecular patterns. So these are molecules that are released from damaged or dying cells, which trigger inflammatory response and also alert the body of damage or infection. Whenever these PAMPs or DAMPs are received by the toll-like receptors, which is the blue dot on the microglia, then the microglia becomes inflamed and the inflammatory response begins, starting as the ramified microglia, which is that little cell you see there with the increased cell body. So this is kind of like a police officer because now it's starting to attempt to get rid of the bad guys. How it does this is through phagocytosis, which means engulf. So this cell is going to try to engulf the PAMPs and the DAMPs in order to remove them. This is where we get to the amoeboid state. Whenever it wants to engulf the PAMPs, DAMPs, or it can also engulf a damaged neuron as well. So in an attempt to engulf or remove any of these through phagocytosis, it produces a severely inflamed microglial cell, which is called the amoeboid state, and it's very big. It doesn't necessarily have a lot of branches on it, just kind of a big blob. This is kind of like a firefighter cell because when it starts to engage in phagocytosis, it's going to put out the fires or remove the pathogens and the bad guys from the brain. So here you can see that the cell is going to engulf the dead neuron and remove it. It's also going to do the same thing for the PAMPs and the DAMPs.